You know, on my way over here today, I was thinking about what pleasure I was taking in the idea that I was going to be speaking to an audience of poets and writers, readers as well, but poets and writers, and for poets and writers, which has long been one of my absolutely favorite organizations and magazines. And there are a few places in the world that allow us to feel like what we're doing isn't, I don't know, this tiny little thing that is completely out of step with absolutely the rest of the universe, I guess. There's a place in New York, too, the Center for Fiction, which when I walk into the Center for Fiction, I feel like with their stacks of 80,000 books and their books about writing in the lobby and the things going on, you know, these and Penn, another one, like you just feel like this is a vibrant and thriving and yes, as Megan was saying, we are in a transition, but we're also here to stay. So it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. Still writing began, well, as pretty much everything else in my creative life has begun, by mistake. Everything really that's been good in my life has happened by mistake, I would say, or accidentally, let's put it that way. It began because about 5 or 6 years ago, my publisher at the time told me that I really ought to have a blog. And I didn't really want to have a blog. I didn't read a lot of blogs, but the wisdom was you should have a blog. And so I thought, what can I blog about on a regular basis that's not going to make me want to stick pins in my eyes? You know, like what can I, you know, who cares what I had for breakfast? Not me, not you. You know, what is the, how can I find some way to really engage with this idea of blogging? And what came to me was blogging about the creative process, blogging about what it is to sit down every day and face the blank page. What does it take? How does anybody else get into the chair, stay in the chair and not go online, you know, stay in the chair and not think, oh, I'm hungry, I need to get up and go to the refrigerator, and then somehow it's 3 hours later. Ron Carlson, I don't know if he said this today, but one of the things Ron Carlson has famously said is that that the internet, like writing with the internet on your computer, is like writing in the middle of an amusement park. And I really wanted to engage with what the qualities are that allows a writer to write. Courage, persistence, patience, endurability, you know, the ability to endure. And so I started blogging about these things, and a funny thing started to happen, which was that almost every day I started getting notes from other writers. And they were beginning writers, they were writers who I admired, they were peers of mine, friends of mine, and every one of these emails contained within it, almost in an eerie way, the phrase, "This is what I needed today. Thank you, this is what I needed today." And what I realized was that I was helping people. I hadn't started out knowing that I was going to be helping people, but that somehow these little missives that I was sending out into the world once a week or so were really making some sort of difference. And this was around the time that my last memoir, Devotion, had come out, and I was assuming that the next book I was going to write would be a novel. I was longing to get back to fiction. But at some point, I realized that I was being asked to write this book. And this was the first time that anything like that had ever really happened to me. My books always come after a long period of waiting that culminate in a kind of despair that finally, when I was thinking right before the holidays, if I were going to create a list of like the 7 steps toward a creative act, what would they be? And I really had no idea what they would be, and I was kind of getting sick of all these 7 steps and 5 steps and 10 steps kind of lists. But I did realize one thing, which is that the penultimate one, the one before the very last piece of really getting down to work, is despair, is kind of hitting an absolute rock bottom of that then propels the artist up into, excuse my language, but into just fuck it. What do I have to lose? Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and do this now because I am scraping myself off the bottom, but I need to get to the bottom before I can do that. And so I was waiting. I was in this period of time of waiting for my next book to materialize, feeling, as I always do, that it wouldn't, and that I would never have another idea again. And 8 books, 7 books into this life, this time, really nothing was ever going to happen again. And then I thought, well, wait. I'm being asked to write this other book. I'm being asked to write this because another thing, the emails started coming in saying, when's the book coming out? I was like, what book? And people assumed that I had started the blog so that I would then sell it as a book. I hadn't. It never occurred to me. But so then I did sell still writing based on the blog, and then I never once looked at the blog again. And I wrote the book from page 1 because I didn't want it to be a book of blog posts. I wanted it to be a book that, blogging is actually something that I've come to enjoy, but it's a different impulse, and there's a different kind of self-editing, and I wanted this to be something that would last. I wanted it to be something that wasn't just, wasn't hitting the button saying publish now. I wanted it to be something that would hopefully stick around for a while and become part of, bookshelves of books about writing. And so then I started thinking about books that I have loved over the years about writing, and I went back and I looked at them. And the ones that I keep by my desk, I've always kept Annie Dillard's The Writing Life near me, as a companion, as kind of a just knowing that she's near me, and that I can open that book like it's the I Ching to any page, and I will receive something from it. I also keep Virginia Woolf's A Writer's Diary near me. And what I wanted to do, although I couldn't have articulated it at the time, was I wanted to write a book that would be like a friend or a companion to my tribe of fellow writers. Not so much instructional, not really how-to, partly memoir. And so the book is structured as beginnings, middles, and ends. And the glue that holds it together are these pieces of memoir, because I realized I didn't want it to be a collection of essays about writing. I wanted it to also be about what was formative for me as a writer, which was a little scary to even contemplate. I worried that it was going to be like, looking into the magician's bag, or like, looking under the hood of the car. Like, how much did I really want to know about what had formed me as a writer? How conscious did I want to be of that? But I also realized that in order to write this book, I had to be willing to be conscious of at least some of it. So I began with that. And so the book is structured as these small pieces, puzzle-like pieces that are kind of given structure by the memoir pieces. I'm going to read a few different sections of each after they go away. So what I thought I would start with is permission. When I've been traveling around the country talking and reading from still writing, one of the questions that I tend to ask an audience in a bookstore or in a library is, how many of you are writers, which I'm not going to ask here. But how many of you are writers? And some hands would go up. And then one time I asked, how many of you write? And many more hands went up. And it was really interesting because it struck me that very much had to do with this feeling of giving oneself permission. I had for a long time a letter of Sylvia Plath's hanging in my office that she wrote to a bookseller who was asking her for her biographical information, and it was written about 6 months before her death, and it was in this order. It was, Dear Ms. Vincent, here's the information you requested. 1, occupation, housewife and mother of 2 small children. 2, publications, The Bell Jar, The Colossus. And Isabel Allende once said that I think she was 5 books into her writing life before she stopped and wondered what she should put on her tax return. Novelist, writer, teacher, housewife. So permission. If you're waiting for the green light, the go-ahead, the reassuring wand to tap your shoulder and anoint you as a writer, you'd better pull out your thermos and folding chair because you're going to be waiting a good long while. Accountants go to business school, and when they graduate with their degrees, they don't ask themselves whether they have permission to do people's taxes. Lawyers pass the bar, Medical students become doctors, academics become professors, all without considering whether or not they have a right to be going to work. But nothing and no one gives us permission to wake up and sit at home staring at a computer screen while everybody else sets their alarm clocks, puts on reasonable attire, and boards the train. No one is counting on us or waiting for whatever we produce. People look at us funny, very possibly because we look funny. Strange and out of sync with the rest of the world after spending our days alone in our bathrobes, talking only to our household pets, if at all. I can't imagine what my UPS delivery guy thinks when I crack open the door to sign for a package. There's that weird lady again. My husband, who has been a successful journalist and screenwriter for most of his adult life, was in his 40s before his father stopped asking him when he was going to get... Thank you. Sure, there are advanced degrees in writing and various signifiers that a career might be underway, but ultimately a writer is someone who writes. And a writer who writes is one who finds a way to give herself permission. The advanced degree is useless in this regard. No writer I know wakes up in the morning and while brushing her teeth thinks, check me out, I have an MFA. Or, for that matter, I've published X number of books, or even I've won the Pulitzer Prize. There is no magical place of arrival. There is only the solitary self facing the page. It's strange and challenging, glorious and devastating, this business of being a writer. Every day, a new indignity. By the way, I've wanted to make t-shirts for all my writer friends that say, every day, a new indignity on them. I'm going to do that. The rejection is without end. Almost any short story you ever see published in the Atlantic Monthly or Harper's has been rejected first by the New Yorker. I actually went way further with that in the first draft and had, Tin House and Paris Review and Plowshares and all these magazines in there, and I thought no one will ever publish me again or talk to me, so I stopped there. But press many of us, including those you'd think might have moved beyond this, and you will discover that we can quote you the most painful passages from our worst reviews. We can give you lists of critics who are dismissive of our work. We will tell you which judge on which academic committee blackballed us. On some mornings, these rejections, reviews, enemies seem to stand between us and our work like a mutant army. Who are you to give yourself permission to write? They seem to shout. We writers are a thin-skinned, anxious lot and often feel like we're getting away with something, that we're going to be revealed at any moment as the frauds we really are. Whether you are a writer just mustering up the nerve to sign up for your first weekend workshop, or filling out your MFA applications, or one gazing moodily out from a big poster in the window of your local bookstore, you are far from alone in this business of granting yourself the permission to do your work. Masters of the form quake before the page. They often feel hopeless and despairing. They may also fall prey to petty musings. They have days in which they simply can't get out of their own way. But when we give ourselves permission, we move past this. The world once again reveals itself to us. We become open and aware, patient and ready to receive it. We don't ask why that particular slant of sunlight, snippet of dialogue, old couple walking along the road hand in hand seems to evoke an entire world. We give ourselves permission because we are the only ones who can do so. There's a great expression in 12-step programs, act as if. Act as if you're a writer. Sit down and begin. Act as if you might just create something beautiful. And by beautiful, I mean something authentic and universal. Don't wait for anybody to tell you it's okay. Take that shimmer and show us our humanity. That's your job. So, thank you. So this idea of there never being any magical place of arrival, I think it's a really important one for every writer to wrap his or her head around. That there is no brass ring. There is no moment where, I remember a number of years ago when a novel of mine had just sold, and it was a really kind of a big deal, and it was written up in various magazines, and a friend of mine, another writer, called me up and she said, "You've grabbed the brass ring." And I remember even at that time thinking, there is no brass ring. There is a long writing life, and it's full of fits and starts and ups and downs. I mean, in one of my readings where I read that passage about permission, someone during the Q&A said, "So, and what point did you finally give yourself permission?" And I said, "This morning," which wasn't even true because I hadn't written that day. But the idea that that's not, there is no place where finally there's a place of arrival. It doesn't exist. And so that's both good and bad news, right? I mean, the good news is that every writer alone in a room is experiencing this. The bad news is it doesn't get easier. I don't think it's meant to get easier. I think it's also why writers are among the only people, because if we're lucky enough to hold on to our faculties, who can get better for our whole lives. I think the thing that I'm proudest of in my writing life is that I really do believe I've gotten better with every single book that I've written. My competition is with me, and that is my hope. That is my hope for myself for the rest of my life, is that I continue to some degree reinvent myself with each book, and at the same time to get better and to continue to take risks with each book. And that also goes back to the question of permission, which I think is huge and central. I thought I would now read a passage that has a lot to do with my own personal challenges in learning to grant myself permission on a daily basis, which is one of the memoir pieces in this. I found when I explored what was formative for me, a lot that came up was about motherhood and daughterhood, a lot about my relationship with my mother, and a bit about myself as a mother as well, and the ways in which the things that happen to us in life change us. And if we're writers, it means that we're changing the very instrument with which we write. So this is called Smith Corona. Behind the closed door to her office, my mother typed. Most nights, I fell asleep to the thunderous clacking of the keys on her Smith Corona, the high, thin ding of the carriage as she pushed the return lever at the end of each line. In her office, which shared a wall with my bedroom, she sat behind a big wooden desk piled with papers and boxes. She made carbon copies of everything she wrote. Not an inch of the surface of the desk was ever visible. If I close my eyes now, I can hear her. She was a very fast typist with long, strong fingers. The steady rhythm, ticka, 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 ding, ticka, 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 ding, was my childhood lullaby. In the sound of those keys, I heard frustration, anger, longing, determination, regret. My mother was always starting things she didn't finish. Some of her ideas had nothing to do with writing, notably a line of jewelry, for which she manufactured a prototype of a 24-karat gold tennis ball pendant with a sapphire in its center, the motto being, "Keep your eye on the ball." You can't make this stuff up. My mother was my muse in many ways. But her greatest efforts went into writing projects. One was a children's book called Yes, Marianne, the World is Round, a story about a girl whose dolls spring to life and tell her all about the countries they come from, for which my mother hired a famous children's photographer and used me as her model. I still have the manuscript for this book, the photographs encased in plastic sleeves, me as a 5-year-old in a yellow flannel Lance nightgown holding my dolls. My mother attempted most genres, children's books, poems, essays, journalism, and writing for TV, big screen, and stage. She wrote spec scripts for the Partridge Family and Hawaii Five-0 and sent them in manila envelopes to the offices of the Hollywood producers whose names were listed in the show's credits. She didn't know that submitting these scripts in this manner was about as effective as making them into paper airplanes and flying them out the window. She had a strange, strained combination of cluelessness and desire. She flitted from project to project, never seeing anything through to the end. I was highly attuned to my mother. I felt and sensed her moods the way an animal can feel thunder and lightning miles away. She was my first lesson in character and point of view. I watched her carefully. I always, always knew what she was thinking. The way she behaved and what she felt were often at odds. She might, for example, be dancing around the kitchen, singing in her wobbly soprano and conducting with a wooden spoon, but she was staving off some sort of darkness, a rejection, an insult, a slight. Her most impassioned work was epistolary, and her Smith Corona was her weapon. She wrote letters to the mayor, the rabbi, the President of the United States. The letters were full of emphasis, as made clear by whole paragraphs in capitals, rows of exclamation points, sentences underlined in red pen or yellow highlighter, or sometimes both. My mother was filled with what seemed to be a bottomless ire. She was fueled by self-righteous indignation, which was only made worse when the mayor, the rabbi, the President of the United States didn't personally write back. Ticka, 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 ding. Ticka, 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 ding. A girl falls asleep each night to the song of a typewriter. A girl, once again I become a character in my own childhood, feels the unhappiness simmering beneath her mother's determination. The girl tries hard to please her mother. Many years later, when she's a grown woman, one of her aunts will turn to her and say, "Do you want to make your mother happy? Do you really, really want to make your mother happy?" "Oh, yes, yes, she did." "Well, then move in with her," the aunt said. And back then, the girl believed that her very survival depended on being good and pretty and accommodating and all the things her mother wanted her to be. She had no way of knowing that it was a losing battle, that no matter what she did, she herself would someday be identified as the cause of her mother's misery. Eventually, she would be the recipient of long letters, carbon copies, covered with red ink and yellow highlighter and rows of exclamation points. How dare you? Once I was a grown woman, a writer, a teacher of writing. This came to be one of my mother's favorite rants. How dare you? As I sit on my chaise longue, covered by the antique Tibetan blanket, my dogs sleeping by my side, the wind blowing hard outside my window, my small computer balanced on my lap, books and papers all around me, my mother gone, 8 years now, I can still hear her trembling voice as clearly as the clacking keys of her typewriter. I never asked her, what was it that I had dared? What was so terrible I had dared to become? Thank you. Let me ask you guys a question. How many of you work on nonfiction and memoir? How many of you sort of ask yourself the question, what's going to happen if so-and-so reads this, or are waiting for somebody to die before you write about them? Or I'm seeing a lot of hands. So I'm thinking I'm going to read this passage called Betrayal, that now I'm going to have to find, because I wasn't planning on reading it. But, you know, whenever I read that passage about my mother, I am struck by this feeling that will never really fully go away for me of betraying her by writing about her. And that's been something that I felt both before her death and after her death. And interestingly, I think more intensely after her death, because there was a feeling of having the last word, and of really the profound responsibility of that she was no longer here fighting with me about my point of view, that there was this responsibility in that. And I'm going to see if I can find it quickly. Okay. Betrayal. The poet was being interviewed on stage. She had recently published a memoir about her father, an eminent bishop. She was the bishop's daughter, which was also the title of her memoir. Her father had been bisexual. The secrecy surrounding this fact had thrown a heavy cloak over her childhood and early adulthood, and much of her inner world, depression, anxiety, alcoholism, not to mention her own sexuality, had been tangled up in it. For the better part of 5 years, she worked on this book, probing her memory, while at the same time reporting and researching. Along the way, she discovered and met with the man who had been her father's great love. The memoir was a tour de force of writing and of living, a valiant and painstaking excavation of a particular truth, her own. Of course she had a right to tell her own truth, didn't she? As I sat in the audience, I felt anxious for the poet, Honor Moore, who was my friend. She had been visibly trembling as I drove her to the event. Her memoir had caused an uproar in her family. She had committed an unpardonable sin, it seemed. She had broken ranks to tell the story that had been kept secret for decades. Several of her siblings had written letters to The New Yorker, where an excerpt had run expressing their outrage. These letters were followed by an avalanche of toxic online comments. A gentle poet, a teacher of writing, she was now a lightning rod for controversy. Some were saying she should have known this would happen. Others that the book was a calculated bid for the kind of publicity a poet would not normally receive. Either way, she was this moment's poster child for literary betrayal. On stage, her interviewer ran through questions about voice and narrative, poetry and memoir, and then brought up the letters to The New Yorker. Can we talk about your family's response to the book? Honor was wearing an ankle-length black skirt and a flowing blouse with flat shoes that seemed to anchor her to the ground. Her gray-black hair shone in the spotlight. She was not a young woman. She had been through plenty. I believe that we don't choose our stories, she began, leaning forward. Our stories choose us. She paused and took a sip of water. Her hand, I noticed, was steady. And if we don't tell them, then we are somehow diminished. Diminished. The word went through me like a bolt. I pulled out the small notebook I carry with me and scribbled down what she had just found the grace to say. There it was, all of it. I thought of my favorite passage in the Gnostic Gospels. If we bring forth what is within us, it will save us. If we do not bring forth what is within us, it will destroy us. And what the Bhagavad Gita has to say about dharma. Better is one's own dharma, though imperfectly carried out, than the dharma of another carried out perfectly. I knew about the struggle for authenticity, the mining for words to collect together what felt impossibly broken. I wanted to gather up in my arms all that was lost to me. I wanted nothing less than to remake my world. A writer afraid of her own subject, whatever it might be, is a frozen creature, trapped in the inessential, diminished. It steadies me to tell these things, wrote Seamus Heaney in his poem Crossings. Honor had written a story that was essential to her. She had faced herself on the page, her demons, her fears, her own fallibility. In order to tell her story, she'd included others, mother, father, siblings, lovers, because she hadn't lived in a vacuum. She was her own narrative's central character, but there were other necessary supporting ones. My mother's voice came flooding back to me. What right? How dare you? An aunt's coldness that never thawed after my first memoir was published. An uncle's only comment, a request that I insert errata into future editions to correct a misspelling of his wife's name. A half-sister on a meditation retreat in Poland on the train tracks of Auschwitz, who reportedly overheard a group of people discussing my second memoir, a book in which she does not appear, and interrupted them to announce, I'm the evil half-sister. Janet Malcolm has called journalism morally indefensible. The business of art is theft, is armed robbery, is not pleasing your mother. Joan Didion referred to writing as the tactic of a secret bully. We will do what we must. Our lives are our material. My mother once asked me if I really needed to include in an essay published in the New York Times the details of the first non-kosher meal she ever ordered in front of me, a bacon cheeseburger. Oh, yes, I did. Will I ever be entirely comfortable with the ruthlessness of revelation? Will you? Most likely not. It is an uncomfortable existence we've chosen, or perhaps has chosen us. But still, I do not believe we are monsters. We search for the line between what is essential and possibly hurtful and what is superfluous and possibly hurtful. We become aware of our own power and try to use it wisely. There is no room for clever pot shots, for making ourselves look good at another's expense, for using our pen for revenge. The stakes are high. The stakes are love and, yes, honor and moral responsibility. We ask ourselves, why? Why this story? Why this moment? Is it necessary? If we are vigilant, we will know when we are betraying others and when we are in danger of diminishing ourselves. And now, it's so interesting. All the years that I've taught, I've been teaching since my first novel came out in 1990. One of the things that I really love about teaching, and it was one of the great pleasures and surprises in writing this book, is that I discover things that I didn't know I knew, well, which is also a lot of what writing is about. But I'll say something and think, yeah, that's really true. That's right. That is exactly what I think about voice. That is exactly what I think about point of view. But a writer sitting at her desk is not thinking about voice and point of view, or if she is, she's in trouble. Because that kind of self-consciousness, when we're actually approaching the page, has no place. So teaching and writing a book about writing was really an opportunity to be thinking about the things that I caution my students all the time, that when you're working on a first draft of something, it's really helpful to be kind of dumb like an animal. There's kind of like animal-like sniffing your way through the forest, kind of sensory dumbness. I mean, I know certain writers who are actually just plain too smart to be really great fiction writers. They're too... They can't help themselves from overthinking, and they constantly get in their own way. It's very helpful when you're editing and when you're revising something to have that kind of sort of really penetrating intelligence. But when you're approaching the page that way, when you're beginning, it's hard to even get one word down on the page. So it was very helpful to be able to have to articulate and think about these things in this way. And this is one of the passages that this was very true for me about, which is called Ordinary Life. An infant's dire prognosis, a father's sudden death, a mother's broken bones. In a passage from Julian Barnes' novel, The Sense of an Ending, a character considers the question of accumulation. You put your money on a horse, it wins, and your winnings go on to the next horse in the next race, and so on. Your winnings accumulate, but do your losses. Not at the racetrack, there you just lose your original stake. But in life, here different rules apply. You bet on a relationship, it fails. You go on to the next relationship, it fails too. And maybe what you lose is not two simple minus sums, but the multiple of what you staked. That's what it feels like anyway. Life isn't just addition and subtraction. There is also accumulation, the multiplication of loss, of failure. End quote. The two greatest shocks I have experienced, my parents' accident and my son's illness, ignited in me what had already been a flickering flame of awareness, some might even say hyper-awareness, that life is fragile, that bad things have happened and, without a doubt, will again. That to love anything at all is to become able to lose it. Some days this awareness gets the better of me. Anxiety sets in, I grow impatient and controlling, or I retreat from the world. But more often than not, this burden of accumulation feels like a gift. It has taught me that ordinary life, or what Joan Didion calls ordinary blessings, is what is most precious. We are revealed to ourselves just as our characters are revealed to us through our daily actions. When making my son's breakfast, I try to focus simply on cracking the eggs, melting the butter, toasting the bread. It doesn't get more elemental than that. As I drive down country roads taking Jacob to school, I remind myself to focus on the way the sunlight plays on the surface of a pond, the silhouette of cows in a field. I've learned that it isn't so easy to witness what is actually happening. The eggs, the cows. But my days are made up of these moments. If I dismiss the ordinary, waiting for the special, the extreme, the extraordinary to happen, I may just miss my life. When I first started out, I thought that my characters and their circumstances had to be somehow large. I wrote a novel about a famous artist, another about a psychoanalyst who had been through a public humiliation. I loved these characters, and they were real to me, but they weren't ordinary. When I turned to fiction, again after writing my memoir Slow Motion, in the wake of Jacob's illness, it was an ordinary family that began to play around the edges of my mind. Perhaps I had come to see that life's greatest revelations are contained within the everyday. Virginia Woolf knew this. Her Mrs. Dalloway was just a woman going about her business. It was her interior life that rendered Clarissa Dalloway extraordinary. Gustave Flaubert knew this. Emma and Charles Bovary were regular people trapped in a bind. Faulkner said that it is the problem of the human heart in conflict with itself which alone can make good writing. The illuminating of that conflict, one that resides inside every heart still beating, is itself a thing of beauty because it allows the reader to experience empathy, oneness, identification. It allows that greatest consolation of literature, which is to pierce our separateness, to show us that in this business of being human, we are not alone. Marilynne Robinson, who in her novels Housekeeping and Gilead masterfully reveals the interior lives of characters who are at once ordinary and indelible, once said this in an interview with the Paris Review, quote, "You have to have a certain detachment in order to see beauty for yourself, rather than something that has been put in quotation marks to be understood as beauty. Think about Dutch painting, where sunlight is falling on a basin of water, and a woman is standing there in the clothes she would wear when she wakes up in the morning. That beauty is a casual glimpse of something very ordinary. Or a painting like Rembrandt's Carcass of Beef, where a simple piece of meat caught his eye because there was something mysterious about it. You also get that in Edward Hopper. Look at the sunlight, or look at the human being. These are instances of genius. Cultures cherish artists because they are people who can say, look at that. And it's not Versailles. It's a brick wall with a ray of sunlight falling on it. It is the job of the writer to say, look at that, to point, to shine a light. But it isn't that which is already bright and beckoning that needs our attention. We develop our sensitivity, to use John Berger's phrase, our ways of seeing, in order to bear witness to what is. Our tender hopes and dreams, our joy, frailty, grief, fear, longing, desire, every human being is a landscape. The empathic imagination glimpses the woman working the cash register at the convenience store, the man coming out of the bathroom at the truck stop, the mother chasing her toddler up and down the aisle of the airplane and knows what it sees. Look at that. This human catastrophe, this accumulation of ordinary blessings, of unbearable losses, and still a ray of sunlight, a woman doing the wash, a carcass of beef, the life that holds us, the life we know. It's so nice reading these little pieces and getting, I'm going to finish reading with the very end of Still Writing. I think you'll see why. And then I wanted to leave lots of time for a Q&A because there's a lot to talk about. Still Writing. My friend Mark, a sculptor whose large-scale works in granite and marble have been commissioned by Stanford University and Penn State, whose pieces are in some of the most prominent art collections in the country, who is a well-respected professor at New York Academy of Arts, pulled me aside at a dinner party. "Somebody just asked me if I was still doing my sculpture thing," he said. I laughed. "I'm serious," he said. "How was I supposed to respond? Are you still doing that brain surgery thing?" I thought of all the times that I've been asked if I'm still writing. I've been asked this by acquaintances and strangers, even by fans, readers of mine. Still writing? It always felt to me like a shameful thing that I was being asked this, that surely if I had written more books, won more awards, made more money, was better known, I wouldn't be dealing with this question. Still writing? Over the years, I've assumed there must be a point at which this would cease to be asked. After 2 books, 5, 7, after being interviewed on NPR, The Today Show, Oprah, for God's sakes. Though I felt protective of my friend, it was a relief, ridiculous though it was, to hear that he had to deal with the same questions. As if he might have outgrown it, changed course, gone into law, or opened a fish store instead. I've asked around and discovered that every artist and writer I know contends with a version of this question. It's asked of writers who are household names. It's asked of photographers whose work hangs in the Museum of Modern Art. It's asked of stage actors who have won Tonys, of poets whose work is regularly published in the finest journals. No one who spends her life creating things seems to be exempt from it. Still writing? Oh, and I'm pretty sure the person asking it means no harm. It's just an awkward stab at social chit-chat, but best to stick with the weather or the miseries of the college admissions process or the deliciousness of the soup. Still writing? I usually nod and smile, then quickly change the subject, but here is what I would like to put down my fork and say. Yes, yes I am. I will write until the day I die, or until I am robbed of my capacity to reason. Even if my fingers were to clench and wither, even if I were to grow deaf or blind, even if I were unable to move a muscle in my body save for the blink of one eye, I would still write. Writing saved my life. Writing has been my window, flung wide open to this magnificent, chaotic existence, my way of interpreting everything within my grasp. Writing has extended that grasp by pushing me beyond comfort, beyond safety, past my self-perceived limits. It has softened my heart and hardened my intellect. It has been a privilege. It has whipped my ass. It has burned into me a valuable clarity. It has made me think about suffering, randomness, goodwill, luck, memory, responsibility, and kindness on a daily basis, whether I feel like it or not. It has insisted that I grow up, that I evolve. It has pushed me to get better, to be better. It is my disease and my cure. It has allowed me not only to withstand the losses in my life, but to alter those losses, to chip away at my own bewilderment until I find the pattern in it. Once in a great while, I look up at the sky and think that if my father were alive, maybe he would be proud of me. That if my mother were alive, I might have come up with the words to make her understand. That I am changing what I can. I am reaching a hand out to the dead and to the living and the not yet born. So yes, yes, still writing. Okay, guys, so questions, you poets and writers. Yes. I think it just was so ingrained in the, there are different ways of talking about permission. The writer Stephen Pressfield talks about resistance. In a way, it's the same thing. It's permission is overcoming resistance, or permission is, there are many ways of thinking of it, but I know that for me, every day, the person who is most likely to get in my own way in terms of getting my work done is me. Sure, there's always life, and there's always stuff, and there's always the plumber and the, whatever. The William Styron, and I write about this somewhere in the book, calls it the fleas of life. I love that. It's sort of like there's that, and then every once in a while there's like the big kahuna, the elephant of life, or whatever that comes stomping through. But mostly it's, in an ordinary day, it's the fleas. But really, ultimately, I became aware that on a day that was not a good writing day, it was because I stopped myself. And by good writing day, I don't mean the end result of the day. I mean, the end result of any given day is none of our business. We're not going to know for a long time what the end result of any given day really is. I also had to learn that inspiration was something to be very wary of, the idea of, well, I'm going to sit down when I'm inspired to write. If I only sat down when I was inspired to write, I think I'd have like a teeny little chapbook to my name. And inspiration can also kind of lie. You know, I've had days where I've sat down thinking, nothing is going to happen today. I'm way too, I don't know, whatever. I can't work today. And sometimes that will be the best writing day. Or I don't have enough time. Here's an example. I was in Miami recently on book tour, and I was on a panel with a couple of wonderful writers, the writer Will Schwalbe, who wrote the End of Your Life book club, and then this writer who I hadn't known, whose name was Josh Harnegany. Now, Josh Harnegany wrote a book called The World's Strongest Librarian. He has Tourette's, very, very severe Tourette's. And to watch him on a panel in front of a large audience was one of the most moving things, and sort of, watching him just be incredibly, the courage and the heart of this man. But what he talked about is that he can only write for 15 minutes a day because his Tourette's goes wherever he puts his attention, right? So it's kind of the nature of that, it's a really difficult neurological condition. And so when he puts his attention to writing, he's got about 15 minutes before it catches up with him. And so he wrote this book, which is a beautiful book, in 15 minutes every day. And that was just I wish he could do a TED Talk. I mean, I wish everybody could hear this and I now tell that story whenever I can, because the idea of permission, those become sacred minutes. On days when I feel like, well, I have a lunch date, so there's really no point in sitting down at 8 o'clock in the morning to get work done. Well, that's me getting in my own way. And there are a million ways to do that. Answering the phone, getting on the internet, on and on and on and on. So it wasn't so much a concept that I arrived at as much as, me being my own laboratory, where I just realized, watching myself, this is this struggle. Like, when I began working on my memoir Devotion, that was a tremendous struggle for me, because I thought, well, what right do I have to write a spiritual memoir? I'm not a religious scholar. Growing up in an observant Jewish home as a woman, it also felt like, well, who am I to do this? And I had to kind of overcome that on a daily basis in order to be able to sit down, and at some point the work takes on enough energy on its own that permission starts to feel a little bit easier on a daily basis. I feel that way every day of my life. I'm very aware that, when I wrote in Still Writing, writing saved my life. It is and I think in one of the passages that I read to you was Faulkner's quote, no, it was Updike's quote about the subtlest instrument of self-revelation known to man. Maybe I didn't read that today. But this idea of the subtlest instrument of self-revelation, and that being something that I get to do, is a tremendous privilege. That doesn't mean it feels like it every day. But I never am not aware of it.
You mentioned that your mother wrote many things and didn't usually finish them. Is that correct? And I wondered if you, as an adult, have gone back and read some of that, and if you think that what impeded her was not being able to give herself permission?
That's a great question, or a comment. When my mother passed away and I was cleaning out her apartment, one of the most poignant of the many things that happened during that period of time of cleaning out her apartment were boxes of fresh supplies. Like every year, at some point or another, she went to Staples and she like loaded up on new notebooks and new pens and new Post-its and new folders, and they were still in there wrapping. There wasn't actually that much to go back and read. There was, yes, Marianne, the World is Round, the children's book, which I have. And do I think it was permission? Well, I think probably for any woman of her generation, to some degree, it was permission. But she had been able to give herself permission to do other things. Before she met my father, she had her own advertising agency. This was in the 1950s. So she was someone who was able to really do and achieve, and had a tremendous amount of energy. I'm not sure she was a writer. I think a writer is someone who actually goes ahead and really tackles. I mean, a writer is someone who writes, ultimately. And you know, there's a quote from John Gregory Dunn where he said he doesn't really believe in didn't really believe in writer's block, but that failure of nerve was the best definition that he knew of for a writer's block, which I think is actually a much gentler and more interesting way of thinking of it. I think that there's a lot of courage involved in actually really finding your voice, finding your way on the page, saying, this is my subject, this is my dharma, this is my sacred task, this is the thing I most care about, that I'm going to, you know, this is the thing that scares me, then I'm going to go ahead. Like there's a place on the East Coast called Kripalu, which is a yoga and meditation center where I teach occasionally. And I can never do this in an academic setting, but I can do this at Kripalu. I had a large group of people in a weekend-long workshop, and near the end of the workshop, I said, okay, I'm going to give you an assignment right now. No one's going to see this. You can burn it when you're done. You can tear it into tiny little pieces of confetti when you're done. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do it. Write the thing that you would be absolutely mortified if anyone were to know that you felt or had done, or you know, just anything that you would just die if people knew. Okay, go, start writing, 3 minutes. And I sat there and I watched, I don't know, like 50, 60 people. Not one of them hesitated. Not one of them was like sitting there thinking, I gotta really think about that. What would that be? They were all writing, and in this beautiful, like the expressions on their faces were just, they were rapt. They were completely absorbed in those couple of minutes with what they were doing. And what I said to them when they finished is, in some way or another, what you've just done is connected to your subject matter. In some way, that's something that is worth thinking about, even if you tear it up or you set it on fire. And then later, I was thinking, if I were a different kind of human being and teacher, what I would have done is said, just kidding, you got to read them aloud now. Because, and I would never do that, but because if they did, what they would discover is that everyone else in the room would be nodding. You know, it's the thing that is, you know, Stegner once talked about literature as I'm not going to be able to summon the exact quote, but it taps the reader gently on the sternum, which I just think is such a beautiful, you know, what he was really talking about is it resonates. And why does it resonate? Because it's human, because it's authentic, because it's, and so I got a little bit off the subject of my mother there, you'll notice. But I don't think that she had the tools or the courage or the capacity, which may have had to do with permission, to be able to really overcome whatever hurdles she needed to be able to do what she desired. And so she kept on she really did flit from thing to thing to thing. And she did a lot of good in a lot of ways in different volunteer things and the line of tennis jewelry. And she was always doing something and trying something new. But she never bore down and just said, I'm doing this. You know, I had a student at Columbia years ago who came to me, really talented student, came to me right before graduation, and she said, I don't know what to do. Merrill Lynch is coming, this was a while ago, Merrill Lynch is coming to campus recruiting, and I don't know whether I should do that or I should go get an MFA. And I just looked at her and I said, Merrill Lynch? by all means, Merrill Lynch, because if she was positing the question, like, which should I do? It really felt to me like, if you really can formulate the question, then you don't have to do this. And if you don't have to do this, then you won't do this ultimately, because it's not easy. It's not easy to sit down and do this thing. Other questions, and don't be afraid to ask about the business if you want to, because there's whole passages in here about the business. I just didn't read them. There's something fairly far in the book where I talk about how much I hate the word platform unless it's attached to the sole of a very cool shoe. I don't mean to make it sound like a writer is someone who's sitting at her desk writing all day long every day. I mean a writer is someone who stays connected to her work in one way or another, or is tortured by its lack of, tortured by her lack of connection. I would also say something else about day jobs, which is that economic insecurity can be an enormous plaguing thing for a writer, and can stop a writer like cold. I also think it depends on the day job. I mean, I've encouraged students of mine over the years to do things like go, I'm talking about like young people who don't have families to support and stuff like that, but go tend bar. You know, go, I've tended to try to steer people away from publishing jobs because it feels like so much information, maybe too much information in terms of, you know, what the, you know, thinking about the business and really think, I mean, there's a place for thinking about the business of publishing and it's really important, but it's not when you're sitting down and working. I mean, I would begin with it being, I think, necessary to have other readers. A few years ago, in a conference that I run in Italy, there was a student there who, the first night before the workshop began, came up to me, and this is in Positano, Italy. It's really hard to get to this place. It takes, you know, many, like trains, planes, and automobiles. Anyway, this guy got there, and he came up to me before my first workshop, and he said, "I don't believe in workshops." I thought, "You're here. How did you get here?" And it turned out, over the course of the week, he ended up being a really interesting student. It turned out that what he felt was that it was cheating somehow. You know, that accepting the help of others, whether editors or other readers or other writers or a workshop, was cheating, was taking some sort of shortcut. And it really got me thinking a lot, because I don't think that there's a work out there that has not benefited from the eyes of others and that does not have like the thumbprints of other writers all over it. Finding the reader who, and I have a passage in Still Writing about this, but mostly about what to avoid. But in finding a reader or a few readers who really are the right reader for your work and who are going to both have your back and be discerning. I mean, in the list of, I won't try to find it, but in the list of things that I talk about what isn't useful in a reader, competitiveness, envy, the kind of reader who wants to change your work into what they would write if they were writing the particular piece that you're writing, being overly kind, not being discerning, telling you what they think you want to hear, and then, you know, and readers can change from project to project. It's not, I mean, over 8 books, I've had different readers, with the exception of my husband, who I've been with for 5 books, 17 years, who is my first reader and who is a writer. I've had different readers for different books because I'll think to myself, well, what does this book need? Who is, you know, in my coterie of writer friends, and sometimes even when my memoir Slow Motion was coming out, I gave it to a friend of mine who was a mother of a teenage daughter for a mother read, because my mother was still living and I wanted her to read it to see whether there were any of those pot shots in there, anything that I needed to kind of take out that might wound my mother in some way. But in going to conferences, in going to a really good workshop, in going to events like this one, I think it's possible over time to find your peers. And this is one of the ways that the amusement park of the internet is actually a good thing, is that you can share work and you don't need to be in the same city or in the same town or anything like that. But really finding those people, because I think it's very difficult, if not impossible, to really see your own work clearly. Without, and I mean, you can put it in a drawer for a year and take it out and you'll see it much more clearly. But the vision that I have is of putting it into the drawer and bringing it out, seeing it much more clearly, revising it, knowing that it will benefit from being put back in the drawer, putting it in a drawer for a year again, taking it out, revising it. You could do that for your whole life because Ray Carver, when he used to give readings from his stories, would hold a red pencil in his hand. When I go back and I look at my own earlier work, I mean, I tell people all the time not to read my first couple of novels. I'm like, when they tell me they have, I'm like, oh, it's because hopefully we do continue to get better, and but it's very hard to see it, and so that's when bringing in, the troops, I think, becomes really, really important. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, that's a great question, because it can be a writer at a certain point in writing a book, I think, is such a porous creature, where it really feels, which is also why at what point you show your work becomes also very complex. You can show your work too early. If you've written a draft of something and then an editor comes in and has concrete suggestions that feel... See, I guess what I would say is it's the difference between feeling something on a gut level and feeling something on a sort of an anxiety level, like, well, I better do this because the marketplace is, X, Y, and Z, or she's saying I really need to have zombies in here, or whatever the version of that is, or it doesn't have a hook, or it doesn't, or maybe it would be. I think that there is very much a gut sort of solar plexus feeling of knowing when somebody is I've certainly had people tell me things I didn't want to hear over the years. I remember once with my third novel walking into my editor's office, and I had written, it was a very, very long first draft. It was 650 pages that I was hoping were Rothian. I was in love with this narrator, and I just let him riff on absolutely everything. And I walked into her office and, hopeful anticipation, and she picked up my manuscript like this, and she went, "Can you believe you wrote all this?" It was a horrible moment. And in the end, it was a horrible, horrible moment. And she didn't actually she wasn't able to really tell me how she thought I needed to fix it. She just was telling me that it was just a holy mess. And it took me a long time to figure out how to fix that book. And once I did figure it out, 320-page manuscript emerged like a beauty queen from within that, sort of chaotic mess of that novel. But when she said it, even just the "Can you believe you wrote all this?" I knew. I had that sinking, I was hopeful, that I was wrong, but it's not even that conscious. I think that really when you check in with yourself, really truly with your creative self about what feels right, and separate it out from your ambition, from wanting to get the book out there, from wanting to do anything because you've been working on it for so long that you're just willing to, there are many reasons to not take a suggestion. The only one that I think is really valid and authentic is when you sit with it for a while and you begin to see a way to implement it, which is the other piece. When it's structural, when it's characterological, whatever it might be, when you go back into revising something and it starts to work that's usually an indication that that was the right way to go. When you're banging your head against a wall, well, you can do that for a while, and then it'll turn out to be a door that opens. But you have to really feel the difference. There's no other way. Should we take one more question, or should we? One? Does anybody have one short question that they're going to walk out of here wishing they had asked, or does everybody want to go have their free drink?
Yeah. Are you coming for the free drink?
I am.
Yay!
Yeah, that was the question.